What up, though? Welcome to Fat Boy MMA Podcast. This is where we talk about everything combat sports, but mainly MMA. If you want to hear a couple regular MMA fans talk about MMA history, notable fighters, up and coming fighters, and everything in between, then this is the home for you. So sit back, relax, grab a beverage, and let's go. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Fat Boy MMA Podcast. I am your host, DC. And of course, I got my co host here with me a lot.
Hey, how's it going, everyone?
So, on today's podcast, we got two special things going on. For one, we happen to be in the house, the world famous studio of the world famous podcast, Say Hello to the Bad Guy. So, we're doing this on location. And if you don't know, of course, Locke is the host of Say Hello to the Bad Guy. So, we have that going on. But also from Say Hello to the Bad Guy, we have one of the premier voices on Say Hello to the Bad Guy. As a special guest in the studio, we have Bugs here.
What's up, guys? Man, real quick, Locke, you need to take some introduction notes because DC really made me feel special over here.
That's right.
I felt it, and then I looked over at you, and I'm like, oh, yeah. He likes this introduction. He didn't even know what to say. He had the glory tear. He had to wipe that one tear.
One slowly rolling down the cheek. So, we got a great podcast for you here today.
Got a great one.
We got a great one today. So, just recently, we had UFC 269, at which the main event and the co-main event was Dustin Poirier versus Charles Oliveira and Amanda Nunes versus Julianna Pena. And so that was a pretty significant event. And of course, I guess you could say both fights were an upset because both of the underdogs won. But I really would question as to why one of them were an underdog. But I wanted to talk kind of generally around this topic, the fights themselves, the individuals, kind of what came out of that. And I want to start off with the Nunes-Pena fight because I think that was the biggest upset of them.
Yeah.
And some people are even calling that as the biggest upset in MMA all-time history. So my first question is, both Bugs and Locke, did you see that coming? Since you are the special guest today, Bugs, I'll throw that over to you first. Did you see that coming at all?
Well, this one I was excited to talk about, so that's why when you invited me on, I was ready. Previously, before the fights, I had a conversation with Locke because while I was out in school, a couple of friends of ours, we planned on getting together to watch it, and my first thoughts was this is going to be a tough fight for Nunes. And after long discussion, Locke was like, no, Pena's overrated. It's not going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was watching that fight, and there's a couple times it was thought Pena wouldn't be able to strike with her,
Mm-hmm.
and she started throwing some hands, and it looked like she got rocked a couple times.
Yeah.
But when Pena submitted her, I was in awe. Like, I was in shock because I knew it was going to be a tough fight. I wasn't giving it to Pena,
Mm-hmm.
but that was out of left field, and it didn't even look like it was under the neck. So maybe Nunes just kind of gave up on it, but it was a big shock to me.
It was hard to tell whether it's under the neck or right on the chin. I do know you get taps to both,
Right.
But to your point, I'm not sure that it was under the neck. Even when I rewatched
Yep.
it was kind of hard to tell. What was your opinion? Oh, go ahead.
In that situation, if Nunes has never been in a really fight like that before, so if she's getting rocked and she's overwhelmed, that little bit of panic can take over, and that's probably what had happened.
Definitely.
I like that in his summation, he leads by throwing me under the bus at the beginning.
Well, he didn't just throw you under the bus. He ran over you, and then he put it in reverse, and then went back over it, just so you know.
Right. So clearly I made a bad pick on this one. But I am a bigger Nunes fan than you are.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of seen her as the greatest female fighter of all time. And I get that Julianna Pena is a good fighter. So when I say I'm not a huge fan, I understand that she's a top bantamweight.
Yes.
I just didn't think she was even in the caliber of Nunes, and I almost thought it was kind of just we got to give her somebody. It's the best contender out there, and I really thought it was kind of a layup defense for her. Clearly, I was wrong.
Yeah.
But it didn't work out that way, and I know some people are saying it's the biggest upset ever, which it could be, but I think legit statistically, when you look at betting odds, it's undoubtedly like the top 3 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a ridiculous, ridiculous upset. But with the choke, I don't think it was under the neck. I think it might have been on the jaw. But we've seen that with Conor. If you got the wrong person on top of you that's just got that grip, and it's easy for us to sit here and say, and I know it's not, we all understand, the situation, but that snap jaw, that could be a problem. I'd almost rather get choked out than get my jaw brutally snapped by Julianna Pena, so that's a painful situation to be in, and especially if you maybe underestimated, maybe it wasn't your day, just something wasn't clicking, especially if you got clipped and you got some blood in your nose, even if it's not in the neck.
Yeah, that's true, because then you can't really breathe out of your mouth the way you can't breathe out of your nose, so it's like, and if you're already tired, it's a big factor.
So yeah, if that's going on, whether it's on your neck or not, if you can't open your mouth, then you're as choked as if it was on your neck. So, and I know that's a blood choke, but just saying.
So my opinion on it, one, similar to you, Locke, I really didn't give Julianna a big chance until I saw them at the weigh-ins. I didn't realize Julianna was that big. She might have been bigger than Nunes in that fight. Especially if you look at after they rehydrated when they met in the middle of the ring. So originally I was picking Nunes for an easy victory.
Right.
When I was watching the fight, and I was watching the fight with Doc, I ended up telling him before the fight, I said, I watched the weigh-ins last night. Julianna looks really big. Plus, the way that she throws her punches are very unorthodox, and I think she can catch Nunes in this fight. And so let me explain the punches. The way that she throws her punches is really weird. Her punches come up almost like she's about to throw a hook, but then she pushes them out straight. So normally if you were going to throw a jab or something like that, it would come with your arm down and it would chamber and come out.
Correct.
Hers come up like this, and then she'll throw it and make it a straight punch. And what that was doing, that was coming right under or right over kind of that overhand left that Nunes likes to throw. And then she was getting in with the jab first and then throwing that right that came from a weird angle over, right? And I think that's what really did it. But more important than that, something happened that has happened in every Nunes loss. And I think anybody that goes and watch it knows that this is now the formula to beat Nunes.
I'm unaware of this, so I'm excited.
Anybody who makes Nunes grapple in the first 2 rounds has beat her every time I've seen it. Kat Zingano, what's her name? The wrestler, Alexis Davis. I went back and watched a fight that I never seen before this, and it was in Invicta when she fought a lady named Sarah D'Alejo. I may be mispronouncing the name, but the same thing. She came out and right away start grappling, and what it seems like, because, and this is my knock on Amanda Nunes. One, of course, I don't have her as number 1. She's always been number 2 to me. But number 2 is very high. I put her in a high regard.
Right.
But I don't think skill-wise she's that good or that technical. But I think she's always able to overpower people, so it makes up for her lacking skill.
Right.
When you go out and make her grapple in those first 2 rounds, she doesn't have the same hands or power. And now you can either catch her or put her back on the ground and finish her on the ground. And so if you look at that, Kat Zingano finished her on the ground. Alexis Davis finished her on the ground. Sarah, and I don't remember her, I don't know how to pronounce her last name correctly, so I apologize and I won't butcher it again, but they went to a decision, but right from point one, she went out and grappled her. And then what happened in this Julianna Pena fight? She should have let Julianna Pena up when she hurt her. She hurt her twice that dropped her. One was with a kick, and I believe the other one was initially started with a kick, but then she caught her with a punch. But she immediately went to the ground with her. One, Pena's dangerous on the ground, so don't do that. Two, if you're getting the best of somebody on the feet, leave it on the feet. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. So Nunez, like you said, she's very powerful, and even though she's not the most technical fighter, she fights very well.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like a lot of times, a lot of people are gonna come in there and they're like, "Well, no, I'm gonna win, and it's gonna be a spectacular win, and I'm gonna beat her on the feet." Like they want to, no, you're playing to her strengths. Right. So even if you're like Pena is very dangerous on the ground. I haven't watched much of her fights, but I know a little bit about her. But I felt like she held her own while she's standing up with Nunez.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, bringing it to the ground and being able to finish down there, that's where you're comfortable. Keep it home. So I think it just worked well in her favor, and you definitely found Nunez's weakness for sure.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, especially I think that they're making a number 2 already, so it'd be
Right.
interesting how that go. What do you think, Locke?
So I also thought I seen an answer to the riddle of Nunez that people could implement moving forward. I thought it was a little different. I'm not disagreeing with what you say. That makes sense. That's just not what I had picked up or thought about. So what I was thinking is, if you look at a lot of Pena's signature wins against the higher level opponents, when you look at like Holly Holm, Cyborg, they kind of played her game where they kind of bounced on the outside of the pocket, and that's the worst place to trade with her. And you see, even when Pena tried to do that, Nunez can clip her. So she likes to throw those wild haymakers, you know. And if you play that game, she will clip you. When Pena started getting more successful, also it was with the grappling, but she started moving forward with her punches. And we've seen that with a lot of fighters. Cowboy Cerrone doesn't do well if you do it. Conor McGregor. There's just certain fighters that don't like being walked down. And I think we now know that Nunez might be one of those people. And if you look, like Raquel Pennington was that kind of fighter, but she's not in that same kind of category.
Right.
You know, she even though she implements that style, I just don't think she was high enough caliber to beat Nunez. But she also didn't mix in the grappling. That's not in her style.
Right.
So I originally thought, okay, walking them down works. It didn't work for Raquel Pennington because maybe just Rocky just didn't have it. But that's probably actually what it was. Walk her down, and she didn't implement the grappling. So if you can get in her face and grapple her a little bit, that's just not a style that she's into, which is ridiculous. She's a jiu-jitsu black belt, but at the highest level, most of them are.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I would agree with what you said. The issue is the mentality of the person that's going to go in there and decide that they're going to walk Nunez down is also the person that's likely to go in there and brawl and trade. So if we look at the Chris Cyborg fight, Chris Cyborg came out and did just that. Got in Nunez's face, and if you remember, she hurt Nunez twice before she got knocked out. Nunez is kind of old school Brazilian jiu-jitsu brawler when it comes to that. Think Vanderlei Silva. If she gets hurt with a punch and she has any wits about her, she's throwing a hard shot, multiple of them after that. She's not going to fold up just because you hit her hard, right? She tends to fold up when she gasses. She gasses when they make her grapple. So in that Cyborg fight, Cyborg hurt her twice. She ended up back against the gate. Cyborg came in real strong and started throwing wild punches. Nunez still have that, you know, almost you got to be born with knockout power. And she hit and hurt Cyborg. Cyborg being the same type of fighter that says, if you hurt me, I'm going to throw punches, tried to throw again. But then the accuracy, which is a lot more accurate than Cyborg that Nunez had, all of a sudden came back and landed like 2 as Cyborg was going back against the gate. And as we know, that was all she wrote.
Right.
So I would agree with you. I don't think she liked going back, and I think you can hurt her going backwards. The issue is, what do you do from that point, especially if she's not tired yet and has full power?
And the grappling, I think the key thing to that your whole piece with the grappling is it just takes that little bit of sting off that punch. You know, when she's winging that big overhand left, big punches, that little extra sting, that's, a running back that loses a step.
Right.
Well, pre-ACL, you hit that hole and you were gone. Now, 0.2 of a second off, and now that hole's gone, and all of a sudden you're cut. And you're playing for 4 teams in 4 years. Well, that's kind of her punch. You take just that little bit off because you've had to grapple. That's the difference maker in that situation.
Pena also survived Nunes grappling, because there's a point where Nunes was on top and she's dominant and stuff. But because she wasn't able to get her out of there, that, like you said, that's draining. So not only did Pena do a good job grappling defense, but when it was her turn, she capitalized.
Yeah.
And I think we also have to include that clearly Pena is just fucking like hard as fucking granite.
Yeah.
Like, this is a tough chick.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, she took a beating. A lot of female fighters we've seen, or a lot of fighters, period, quit in situations that she was in. She took some lumps, and a lot of people fold up and say, fuck. Holy shit, she hits hard. Holy shit, this ain't going well. And she was fucking pretty tough to focus up, dial back in, and implement a game plan when a lot of people go into panic mode.
Plus, in her victory speech, she quoted the great philosopher Nate Diaz. I'm not surprised, motherfuckers, right? But
possibly one of my favorite moments of like MMA this year, I would say. And I was shocked. I didn't pick any fights right. Like I was terrible the whole card. Any bets I ever recommend to you, do not take it. Do not listen to my advice. I'm
Bet
terrible.
the opposite.
Yeah, I'm bad at picking fights. But even though the night wasn't going how I expected, my fighters weren't winning, when she said, "I'm not surprised, motherfucker," I was on board. I'm like, you know what? Fuck yeah, Julianna. That's how you win me back.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you one thing too. They said they're gonna run. UFC said they're gonna run that fight back. I'm glad to see that, because as we know, there's been times in the past where you've had a long-time UFC champion, and they did not allow them to have an immediate rematch.
Right.
In my opinion, if you've defended at least 4 times your title, and I don't know, 4 doesn't sound like a lot, but to me, that's enough for an immediate rematch.
When you're defending it against the number 1 contender,
Right.
That's elite level.
Exactly. And so I'm glad that this happened, because we've seen in the past on multiple occasions, especially in the women's division, doesn't seem like an immediate rematch when you go out there and you have a title and you defend it a few times and everything like that. So
I feel like they have to, though. Like I'm glad they're doing it as well, but with how big of Nunes and unstoppable how Nunes has been lately, like is it just a fluke? Like, they want to get them back in there as soon as possible, and we'll see if Pena can do it again.
Yeah. No, I agree.
I think the important thing is we could figure out a lot of reasons why it makes sense to do the rematch, but ultimately it's because of the one reason that always influences Dana: money. That is going to be the fight they finally have. Since Ronda Rousey's been gone, since Cyborg's been gone, they finally have a female in the bigger division that they can really push a big money sale for, because people were getting sick. Nobody wanted to see her fight Megan Anderson.
Yeah.
Like, now we know Megan Anderson, I'm not trying to, shit on her, but like, casuals don't get that fight.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a big fight. Before that was Felicia Spencer.
Yeah.
That's a hard fight to sell.
And if I'm not mistaken, they brought Felicia Spencer in for that fight. I think that was her first UFC fight, I could be wrong, but I think that was her first UFC fight. I think she was over, I don't know if it was Invicta, but I think she was somewhere else, and they brought her in because it really wasn't.
Because after she beat Cyborg, they were out of featherweights.
Yeah, it's
So
like,
they're
what
like, we'll
else
just
you
give
do?
us one.
Well, and
But,
just throwing anybody in the cage with
yeah.
a person at that level, that's a recipe for disaster.
Now, the only thing that I don't like about the rematch is they're not giving the best number one champion a chance to go up and take that belt. But this goes back into skill, right? So Valentina Shevchenko, as I mentioned multiple times, when she was up at 35, she only fought bigger women. She might have fought one person that was her size or smaller. Some big girls up there. When 25 came, that was her regular weight class. She completely dominated. Now, she dominated at 35 too because she beat everybody not named Nunes. But other than having the better striking, it was a very tough fight, as we know, the two fights with her and Nunes. But guess who she has a victory over by submission at 135? Julianna Pena.
As soon before you even got there,
Yeah.
As soon as you
the best number one champion.
As soon as you mentioned the best number one champion, now it all makes sense. So this whole time you've been so excited.
Yes.
So fucking excited.
Yes.
And it didn't click to me.
Yes.
And then now I realized it because Pena is a much better matchup for Valentina than Nunes.
Yes, because the Pena doesn't use her size the way that Nunes does. So now the superior striking can really come above, and I think she can take her down. There's a lot of things that she can do. But let me say something that a lot of people may not know, and it's one of those things that you just have in your head, and you joke about stuff, and people have no idea what you're talking about. The reason why I call her the best number one champion is because when she was about to fight Joanna JJ, when she was about to fight Joanna, they were having an argument, and of course neither of them are native English speakers, right?
It's a second language.
Yes, it's a second language. So in their argument, it's kind of like how Khabib says, "This is number one bullshit," right? They kept saying who was the best number one champion. And I had never heard it put like that before. So from that point forward, I started calling her the best number one champion. So that's where that came from.
And there's nothing more American than making fun of people that are pretty fluently speaking a second language.
And you only speak one?
Barely. We barely speak one fucking language. Okay, we bastardize some kind of language that we think we know how to talk. Yes. And but yes, you make one mistake speaking this and some of these people it's their second or third language.
I think it's Valentina's third.
Yeah. Ha ha ha! But she said best number one champion.
Number one champion. That's it. Okay. Anything else about anybody want to say anything else about Nunes or that fight or Pena before I switch over to the main event?
Well, I just want to get kind of a quick idea what your thoughts are on in that rematch, because we see these go two different ways.
Yes.
So sometimes that's the fight where Amanda Nunes, who's a new parent, is newly married, has a family life, has been the champ for a long time. Sometimes this is the Rocky III fight that gets them refocused and recentered, and they come back ready to rip off another 8 to 10 straight fights. Sometimes it's the first fight. It's Frankie Edgar 1, where next thing you know, BJ's lost 10 straight, and the wheels are really falling off this thing.
Right.
So, what is kind of your gauge on where Nunes goes from here? How do you think this is going to affect her long-term fighting?
Great question. So, as soon as the fight happened, a lot of people start mentioning some of the stuff that you said. New parent, the whole thing. She had their new baby at the weigh-in, maybe not quite as focused. She got tired, everything like that. All of that's believable if I take away what I mentioned, I feel like is the equalizer. If Julianna Pena came into that fight and just beat her standing up on the feet and knocked her out, I buy all of that.
Right.
when I look at the history of how she loses, and it's funny because Kent Zingano after that tweeted out, and this is not a direct quote because I don't remember the direct quote of it, but it was something like, "No shit, if you take Nunes into deep waters and make her tired, she'll quit." If you remember when Anthony Rumble Johnson was knocking everybody's head out of the cage,
Mm-hmm.
and DC said, deep down inside of him, he's still a quitter because I remember way back when he get put in a bad situation on the ground, he would quit. That's still him. All I have to do is bring it out and remind him. When you're that kind of person, I don't think that's something you can just erase.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a I got a lot of stuff going on in my life type of issue. So the question becomes to me, can Nunes keep it on the feet and not grapple? If so, I think she got a path to victory because even though she was losing some of those exchanges, that was in the second round. In the first round, they were pretty even and she was getting the better of some of those. It wasn't until after the grappling that ended the round and you come out in the second where you see a little bit of a different Amanda Nunes. If she keeps it on the feet, I think she could get her title back. If she has to grapple, I see it being the same fight.
Nice.
What about you, Bugs?
I don't know. I think it's gonna be the fight that Nunes like evaluates, comes back, gets back. But obviously this is a pretty cool story, and it'd be interesting to see something kind of get switched up within the weight class.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Nunes is that powerful force. I think she's gonna come back. She's gonna work on her defense on the ground, stuff like that, and then, like you said, maybe she was just a little bit out of shape. Maybe her mind wasn't there. She comes back a little bit more focused. It'll keep her from getting tired quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this next fight, it's going to be Nunes. But
So, best number one champ out. We get the rematch. Nunes is back in.
But now let's say however this goes, if Nunes wins, does Pena get Valentina again, or does Valentina get the shot?
Well,
where do you see that going?
I don't think Valentina would move up. She's doing too good at 125, fighting girls her size. I think it would have to be something very enticing for her to move up. And so I think if there was a new champ there, they could convince her, especially with a few dollars, to move up and, take that on. But
so
if
now
Nunes come back and win, I don't think anybody wants to see her versus Nunes 3. I don't think it's going to be a different fight.
Okay. Now, if Pena wins, do you think that's something that can get her to jump up?
Yes,
Yeah?
Absolutely.
I agree because I think if Pena wins, she's now the absolute champ.
Mm-hmm.
Nunes is not completely out of the picture. Maybe she goes to 45. Maybe you know what I mean. Either way,
because she still has the belt up there.
Right. Either way, she's a couple fights out of that bantamweight shot again. I think that is a fight that sells. Pena will like it because she's already defended her belt once, and it's a big money fight for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then Valentina likes it because she knows that's a winnable fight. And then for the UFC, it works. It's a sellable fight. Plus, that gives them a little extra time to let the bantamweight shake itself out with now some opportunities that they didn't have before because, all these girls against Nunes again is not interesting.
Right.
But we can roll anybody back out. Not anybody, but
Right.
all these fights against Pena are all of a sudden interesting again.
Well, it's kind of like how the women's class not too long ago, like Rousey was so dominant, but as soon as everybody's tired of Rousey fighting Tate, but as soon as Holmes got it, Holmes defended it against Tate and Tate took it. This could be something that if Pena wins, which is a good story, but it could mix up a lot for the whole women's fighting as a whole. But if Nunes wins, which I think is gonna happen, it's just gonna be the same thing.
No, I agree. And even at that fight, if everybody remember, they had, and I don't remember if I mentioned this on the last podcast we did, Locke, or if I put it in a fight group, but Kayla Harrington was at that fight, and they kept showing her. And I think I had mentioned, I heard that there were talks about the UFC trying to get her and sign her. She's she's actually bigger than Nunes. She's like the 155 champ, I believe, over in IFL.
Okay.
So I doubt they were bringing her in for 35. My guess is had Nunes defended here, her next fight was going to be at 45 to defend that title. So to your point, even if she loses the next fight, it sounds like they're going to try to do some stuff to build 45.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make that fight with her versus Harrington, it's good on all fronts because either she wins and now you keep building that division, or you got a new star in Kayla, right? So it's kind of a win-win for you there, based on what happens. So,
And if Pena retains that belt, you now have Holly Holm, Aspen Ladd, Irene Aldana. Those are all interesting matchups to see who gets that shot at Julianna Pena versus none of those against Nunes are interesting fights.
Yeah,
Right.
I think the only person that you don't have in that was, Misha Tate still trying to make her come back because I don't think they'll fight each other. If I'm not mistaken, Misha Tate was her coach on The Ultimate Fighter, and they've trained together since. I know she was there cheering for her. I do know that they're friends, so you never know, but I don't think they would fight each other.
Right.
Especially, I don't think Misha Tate's really going to be on a trajectory anytime soon for a title shot.
I'm going to say she's
So-
only at 7 right now, and she's coming off a loss,
It's
I
a
believe.
generous 7.
Very generous. That's a name recognition 7.
Okay, so let's go ahead to the main event. So the main event, of course, was between Charles Oliveira and Dustin Poirier. Charles Oliveira winning that title against Michael Chandler. And of course, they were supposed to fight. Originally, they were trying to make that fight between Oliveira and Dustin Poirier. But Dustin Poirier chose to go for the money, which I would have too. And had was that the third fight? Trilogy, right? With Connor?
Mhm.
Yeah, that was the third fight. So they were 1-1. This was the third fight plus a big money fight.
Red Panty Night.
Correct. So he chose to go in that direction, which I would have too. He won that fight, and then he got the title shot. Now, my first question and what was interesting to me before we dive into the fight first were the odds. They actually had Charles Oliveira as the underdog for this fight. And when I heard that, I thought it was weird because, one, I didn't see him as the underdog. Two, he had just beat a very formidable Michael Chandler. 3, he was on a 10-fight win streak. But yet he came in as the underdog. And so that was very interesting to me. But maybe people looked at his competition as being a little bit different than Dustin. So I wanted to get you all's input on what you think. What's the reason why he came in as an underdog, even though he was a champ in that fight?
I'll go first. So I just think the matchup, I feel like this was their first fight, correct?
Against each other?
Yeah.
Which is surprising. That's a question I'll have later.
Okay. Well, I just think the matchup, like I wanted Oliveira to win, but Poirier is a tough fighter. Like, and I think their styles were different. So I think especially with Portier coming off the win, they were just thinking he was just gonna kind of go in there, take over the fight, which I was nervous at some time because Poirier is really strong. Like before,
He's got dynamite in his hands.
yeah, before they got down to the ground and he ended up taking over control. Oliveira tried to shoot and Poirier stuffed it. When I seen that, I was thinking, this is gonna be rough. But I don't know. I think the reason he was an underdog is just because of the matchup and the fighting styles. Poirier is a very dominant fighter, and I don't think they seen it going the way it did.
No, I can understand that. What's your thoughts, Slot?
So I think the reason I had him as an underdog going into that is I think a lot of people were under the impression, which maybe I was too, that Oliveira's road to the championship was maybe not the hardest. So he is on, I believe you said his 10-fight winning streak.
I think that made number 11, if I'm not mistaken.
But when you look at those wins, a lot of those guys, he beat Kevin Lee, who we've seen isn't necessarily the fighter that we used to hype him up to be. He is a guy that's moved up from from featherweight.
Right.
You know, so he moved up from a lighter weight division. Ferguson was his first signature win, which we've now seen Ferguson is having some trouble. So at first we think that's a signature win. Then you think, maybe did Gaethje break him?
Right.
You know, Michael Chandler, who we know is game and we know is tough, but is also now 1-2 in the UFC. You know, and I think it's one of those things where you look at it in hindsight and all of a sudden you say, maybe these fights that he were winning aren't the impressive fights that we thought they were, especially when people with the pedestal that we put Khabib on. If you look at Dustin Poirier's run to that title, he's beat a lot of elite level guys with the one loss coming to Khabib, who's a fucking buzzsaw.
Right.
You know, so not only beating Conor, but basically taking that throne as, not that Poirier's the signature guy, but he's kind of taken a lot of steam off the career that was Conor's. Max Holloway in a great fight. Justin Gaethje, who's also now at that, you know, a top contender. I just think when you look at the paths that they both took to that night, I think a lot of people, including myself, were saying Dustin Poirier's really climbed a difficult mountain, which Oliveira has over the course of his career. But some of the more recent wins maybe didn't look as good in hindsight, which clearly MMA math doesn't work, and that's a bullshit way to try and figure it out. And we all know that. But when you're trying to pick, that's something you got to consider.
See, I'll tell you what's funny about that. I figured that was how people would look at it. The issue is, I don't think that the people you named that would fit. And this is what I mean by that. So if we take Chandler, Ferguson, Kevin Lee, and David Tamar, right, which a lot of people forget, but he's a very skilled guy. He hasn't fought in a while. I don't know if he retired or what, right? And we look at that, to me, based on what these individuals, who they ended up being, Conor easily falls into any one of those guys, right? He's below Chandler and Ferg. I mean, what has Conor really done since moving up from 45, other than beating Eddie Alvarez, right? We look at Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker was a guy that I really thought was going to be somebody, right? But Dan Hooker, if I go and look at his loss, win, right? If we're not going off of name and we're going off of actually what these individuals are doing, it's not that different. Can't throw Khabib in because that's a loss. You got Max. That was Max moving up to 55 after losing, and then moving back down to 45, right? You got Alvarez, no longer in the UFC anymore. Once he got destroyed by Conor, was never the same guy.
He's like a 500 fighter in one now.
And then you got Gaethje. So out of that,
but that was Gaethje before he's at where he is now, right?
Well, I'm a big fan of Gaethje. I always think Gaethje's dangerous.
Right.
Let me say that. But yes, when Gaethje originally came in, and we talked about this on one of the podcasts before, he had like a couple fight losing streak. Like he came in losing and then he hit his stride.
Yep.
So, but just to say that, I don't think that's that different of a path other than bigger names, not based on what those individuals actually did.
Well, I don't disagree with that at all, and I think the results also speak for themselves. Do you think there could be something to the wars though? Like Dustin Poirier, and not to say Charles Oliveira ain't been in any wars, but he plays a different game.
Yes.
He's more of a jiu-jitsu guy. He does a lot of grappling. Now he's been around a long time and he's earned, paid his dues and all that shit. But Dustin Poirier gets in a lot of firefights.
Yes.
So even when you look at both the Conor fights that he decisively won, he got clipped really hard by a guy that's a hard puncher in both of those fights.
Yes.
Max Holloway, he won that fight. If you look at the round, they were both beat.
Yeah. No,
how you always say, They left some of their soul in the ring that day.
Yeah.
But now that goes to what me and DC were talking about before we even got started with this, is like the basketball players.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Oliveira hasn't been in that many wars, but he still fights technical and he's able to get that done. Now, with Poirier being able to fight the way he does, it's spectacular. It's fun to watch, but yeah, that takes a beating.
You only have so many pieces of your soul to leave out there.
Right.
Yeah, I think the issue is, and this is my only knock on Portier, because let me say this, I like Portier a lot. I think he's very skilled. Portier, unfortunately, is one of those fighters I don't feel like shows enough of what he really can do in the cage. He's been comfortable with becoming a boxer. That's one of the reasons why he gave Conor some trouble in the third fight. He saw one thing, and if you notice, he started doing leg kicks, right? Typically, he's a boxer. He has really good wrestling. He has jiu-jitsu. He has leg kicks. He likes to box. The issue with that now is you become a lot more predictable. In this fight in particular, I think the reason why Oliveira won is because he showed Portier so many different looks. Because especially in that first round or so, Portier was landing the cleaner punches, the harder punches.
Right.
He dropped Oliveira a couple times, but every time something like that happens with Oliveira, you don't know what he's going to do. So he hurts Portier, and Portier's looking for another shot, and he jumps and hits him with a knee. Or he'll throw him against the cage, right? He's doing a lot of different things. When Portier dropped him and Portier thought he was going to come in and pounce on him, the first thing he started doing was throwing crazy up kicks, right? He has so many things that it's going to make you hesitate instead of jumping right in on him. Portier, in my opinion, you know what you're getting with him every single fight. He's tough, he hits hard, and he has very, very good boxing. I think his boxing is underrated. People don't talk about it enough. They don't talk about him in a conversation with the Masvidals and some of those guys. He's absolutely up there with his boxing to me. But the problem is, it's just boxing. And that's also what gets you in a lot of those wars, because now it becomes not even a kickboxing match, just a straight up boxing match, and who's the toughest. And that's going to take a lot of years off of your fighting life.
For sure.
So I think when it comes to the boxing aspect, because my buddy Nick was just reminding me the other day that Poirier is a legit black belt. He's got a really good legit jiu-jitsu black belt.
Yeah.
And I think that Poirier might be a guy that at some point fell out of love with fighting, but it's what he did. It's what he does. And, you know, he's married. He has children. He's got this great charity. And I think he may have fell out of love with fighting right when he was hitting his stride. And you can't really walk away. Now, we all know people that have been very successful at their job when they don't like it, but that's tough to keep moving forward with.
Right.
I think he may have fell in love with boxing, which kind of reinvigorated him to the sport. And people love to play with their new toy.
Right.
you know, and it was working. And it worked really well. But I think many people that are newer fans or casual fans forget how versatile a fighter Dustin Poirier was, that made him what he was when he was at 45 and when he was coming up. And it may have also been something that came along with maybe like part of his weight training program or something, because we also seen that came along at the same time that he committed to 55 and bulked up and changed his body type to fit that weight class. So maybe that's something when you're bulking and you're adding strength and size, that the boxing piece went along with more for him. You know, he's got some newfound power. But I think that he fell in love with boxing, which kind of reinvigorated his, you know, love of fighting. But after his last couple losses, he doesn't look like a guy that's having a great time out there.
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. And you see it happen a lot. And the problem is, once you lose it, it's not that easy to get back because it becomes a mental thing. I think that was one of Woodley's biggest downfalls. And we're not even going to talk about Woodley on this podcast because He just devastated my heart this past weekend. So we're going to bypass that. But you have a lot of these guys with, great wrestling backgrounds, great jiu-jitsu backgrounds. And all of a sudden they decide they are just a boxer. And then you have a guy like Oliveira that says, I'm going to use every weapon. I'm not the strongest. I don't have the best chin, anything like that, but I'm going to mix it up. And every time you come in this cage, you don't know what you're going to get. And you're going to have to actually beat me and take it. And I think that means something. And I just don't think, and to your point, it may have been as simple as finally falling in love with something else. But even if let's get Portier back with doing that low calf kick and give him a few high kicks and a threat of a takedown. He's a whole different fighter. And I think he beats Oliveira, right? Now he's talking about moving up to 170, which is a bad move.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those guys are way too big. All of them wrestle. I just don't think it's a good look for him. They all mix it up well. I just think it's a bad look for him, especially as you mentioned, he spent most of his career at 45.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and that's something I think, like how you're talking about, he just doesn't love it no more. He's tired of going through the stuff he has to do to get to that weight. He's tired of losing and all that stuff. So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to keep trying different things. And you see people on their way out, that stuff they do is, I'm going to stick to this weight class. I'm going to try something different. But I think, if he does that, he's going to struggle for sure.
Now, I have an answer, as you know, Locke.
Well, can I say something real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, because I have an answer, right?
So, I've said on this podcast before that it's never a good sign when the people start jumping up and down in weight classes based on losses.
Mm-hmm.
And Poirier has always been an example, him and Masvidal, that I used of people that went to a weight class, took their lumps, committed to it, and then started to have success there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is a terrible sign for a fighter that I really, really like, that after that loss, the first thought process is, maybe let's go 170.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen it with Cowboy Cerrone. We've seen it with a number of fighters. Usually what happens is you go up the weight class. So Poirier goes up to 170. Now instead of fighting, 5, 4, these top 5 guys, all of a sudden you're going to bounce back to where you're fighting guys that are, 15, 14, and he's going to look great. Maybe get you a couple wins. But the second you start moving up, like you said, these guys are too big, and you have the skill set and the speed advantage all of a sudden doesn't make as much.
Right.
But he might not be trying to go to 170 because he wants a run at the title. I think there's a chance, because he mentioned he's now failed at 2 attempts to become a world champion.
Mm-hmm.
He might just be comfortable with the fact he might have had to decide within himself, I'm never going to be the champion, but I don't want to cut weight and I could still make some money. I can angle for a Nate Diaz fight. I can angle for the Conor rematch at 170 since I won 2 of them. I can angle for, I don't know, like a guy like a Cowboy, some of these lighter guys that are willing to bounce up there. So I think it might not be a matter of him trying to make a run at 170. It might be him thinking, I can squeeze out 2 or 3 more good fights that are interesting fights that people want to see. Now, I'm not talking about just cash grabs that you will make money, but still fights people want to see. And I'm not cutting the weight, because both those fights you can do. Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor, even say he wins both those fights, you could do a Colby Covington because they got a beef at 170.
He doesn't want to fight Colby. Listen, I don't like Colby the person, but as I say many times, I separate the person in MMA from the fighter. Colby is an absolute beast. I know they trained together before at ATT, and Colby would absolutely destroy him. Yeah, he don't. If he tapped to, what happened with Khabib and what just happened with Oliveira, I could just imagine the mauling that Colby would give him, being a much bigger man. But to your point, I agree. I can see him doing that. I can see him trying to do a Nate Diaz type of role. This is the issue. And this goes into my answer as to what he should do. The answer that everybody knows. Stop fighting for a while and go grapple. Which, by the way, they just had a Fight Pass. What is it called? The Fight Pass. The Fight Pass Invitational inaugural grappling match where they take all these people that are under the Fight Pass banner. So you got a lot of small regional shows and everything like that that sign these contracts with Fight Pass. Plus, if you get an invite, it could be UFC fighters and everything like that, all to have these big grappling matches. Now, why do I think that would be important and dope for Dustin? One, the biggest reason why people like Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz stock stays so high, you're not watching them get brutalized back to back to back. Even if they lose multiple in a row, it's spaced out. They give you time for their personality to go out there, for them to make beefs, for people to say, no, I want to see this, for people to believe, right? It's like if it's a guy that went out on a win streak, went out on a losing streak. So let's say after Anderson Silva lost his 3 in a row, he quits fighting. All of a sudden, he becomes this jiu-jitsu guy and all this, which in the world of jiu-jitsu, because so much is tournaments, your record really doesn't matter. It's big matches and stuff that happens. And then 3 years later, he comes back. He can come back as a title fight and make big money because it's enough time in between where people are like, no, I think he still has it.
Right.
When you stay in the game and you keep losing, all of that
credibility,
it all goes away.
Yep.
So in my opinion, and this would help Dustin because maybe he can bring back his love of grappling and mixing it up. If he loves boxing, he's not going to stop boxing, right? But now he can get into grappling and everything like that again. So now in an actual MMA fight, he has a chance to move it in more directions than what he would have even thought to do before. So in my opinion, that's where his next move should be. He's not hurting for money right now. He's made millions. He's still under contract, so it's not like he's cut. Take some time off, go grapple, do some stuff like that, get some of the love back, stop taking punches to the head, and then have a big argument in 2 years with Conor or Nate or whoever else, and then come back and get a big payday. What are your thoughts, Bugs?
It's a well thought out plan. Big fan of the grappling. Mm-hmm. I think if he does that, it's something that could work. Like, I don't know. Yeah, just kind of disappear, let people think and sit on it, and pop back up. But will he do that? Knowing him, 100% no. No. He'll go up to 170, get manhandled, and then slowly disappear.
So I have several thoughts on several different things here. So what a lot of people don't know about DC is, even though he's a tech guy, he is an elite level salesman that just chooses not to do it. And I think
all false accusations.
He may have just made one of his boldest sales pitches ever for grappling when we just took a guy that we just clearly discovered may have fell in love with boxing. Like, yeah, he should grapple.
Yes.
DC came in with a common theme today. Nunes, big grappling theme. He had a game plan. He knew what he's doing.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we all know that Joe Rogan is now a government shill who accepts money from the CIA to discredit conspiracy theories. Everybody knows that. It's out there.
This is a fact.
Yeah. Which makes perfect sense. We get that. So, DC is actually a UFC shill that went deep cover to build a podcast from the ground up to promote their fucking Fight Pass grappling.
Yes.
Because no matter what we talk about or what direction it goes, at some point it ends with the people we're talking about should do grappling tournaments. Whether they're still title contenders, whether they've been retired for years.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, they should go into these grappling contests.
I cannot confirm nor deny that I've ever taken any money from Eddie Bravo that may have had, something about Zuffa back in the day or something about, what's the company that owns UFC now?
what is it?
Yeah.
WE or something?
Whatever it is, I've never seen any checks with those names on them delivered by Eddie Bravo himself. I just want to say that.
So I think we found the missing link between Joe Rogan and you. Eddie Bravo is the shill finder. He'll find people that will shill for money.
No, but yeah, I just think I think these guys are so skilled in so many areas, and a lot of them don't get a chance to show it, and partially it's because of this is how they make their money. Not understanding that you can still build another way to make money, and especially if you're a fighter that takes a lot of punishment, shots to the head, you need to give that brain a break.
Mm-hmm.
I remember back when Freddie Roach talked about when Pacquiao had got knocked out by Marquez.
He went and grappled.
That would have been great. I think Pacquiao could do it, absolutely. But he made Pacquiao, he absolutely banned him from the gym and made him take a full year off without even training. Because he said, when you get knocked out or you take certain damage like that, it takes a long time for the brain to heal,
Right.
especially when you've been in wars. You need to do nothing. Just you moving around and hitting mitts and things of that sort shifts the brain some. So I think some of these things are really important for the people repairing themselves and being better coming back.
I think that Freddie Roach is one of these guys that, all jokes aside, when he speaks about traumatic brain injury and head trauma, we should shut the fuck up and listen and really consider what he has to say. Because, I mean, he knows what he's talking about from experience, personal experience, working with people. And that's where we mess up, is not listening to these people that do fucking know.
When it comes to the head trauma and stuff like that, like, it's not something you just Google and read about. And like, no, this, you got to be there and experience it. And like you said, actually working with these people and figuring out, like, it's kind of like a science. Like he's got it down. So.
Yeah, I want to say one more thing, and then I have a question before we wrap it up. But and this goes to something you said earlier, Bugs. I'm actually surprised that Oliveira and Portier never fought early on. Now, of course, Portier is from the WEC lineage that came over, was rolled over into the UFC, but they actually came right around the same time to the UFC. Dustin came in 2011. Oliveira came in 2010. Both of them were fighting at 45. They fought, quite a few similar guys. Both fought Miller, Holloway, Cup Swanson, Jonathan Bookins. But at some point in time, they were never matched up, even with kind of, fighting similar guys, beating similar guys and everything like that. So I wanted to ask, do you think it was one of those things where just timing wasn't there, or was they on a different trajectory? What do you think it took 10 years for this fight to happen? I'm not mad because I think it's the perfect time based on where they were, but why do you think it took 10 years for this fight to happen?
Looking at it, it's kind of the same answer as why I think Oliveira was the underdog. I think they're just matchups. So like, matchup wise, they didn't really fit well together, and there wasn't a money fight. So when they were up and coming and they came in together, like, it's just something like, throw these two together, they'd be fighting to fight. Like, the UFC didn't see it as a good game plan, I guess. But now with the timing of it, like, they're both pretty big names. They get reputable. I'd say they're kind of at the peak of their career. Like, it was inevitable. Like, matchup or not, it's time to put them together. So I think it was a good money fight, and
no, that makes sense.
I definitely agree, and I think it's weird when you said that. I had to double check, and not to double check because I do believe you, but just looking at the course of fights and the trajectory of their careers, it is bizarre that over 20 fights, 10 years, 2 weight classes that they've missed each other. But I think Bugs kind of hit it on the head. I think a lot of it is as they were coming up, because of their different styles or matchups, it never made sense at those time, as they're both guys that would kind of put a run together, then stumble a little bit, then put it back together. So it was just never that time. But yeah, at some point when you both rise to the cream of the top crop, then you take the styles out and the best has to fight the best, whether they're both strikers, whether they're both whatever. It's crazy that they had that many common matchups.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just career trajectories, they be like that sometimes, you know?
When like 10 years ago when they came in the sport, me as a 10-year-old wasn't thinking, why is Oliveira never fighting Poirier? But so that's something I didn't know about. That wasn't anything I thought of. I just kind of figured, oh yeah, they matched up. But hearing that is kind of interesting and good question.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. So last questions, next fights. So I want to know, who do you all think? Of course, the Nunes Pena. We know what the next fight is for that. They're already booking the rematch. Unless something happens where one of them gets hurt or something, that's their next fight. But for both Dustin and Oliveira, who do you think should be the next matchup? So I believe for Oliveira, I think they said Gaethje was next, but it's the UFC, so that's not set in stone. Who would you like to see next matchup for him and next matchup for Dustin?
So, I think for Oliveira, it has to be Gaethje. Gaethje earned that shot. He probably should have had it over Chandler. He's in that same category with Dustin Poirier, where he's on this impressive run. He hits that Khabib buzzsaw, and all of a sudden he's out. That's crazy. I mean, he probably broke Ferg. You know, that's an impressive feat.
That's true.
So I think he has to have that fight. But I think the Islam Oliveira fight, there's your grappling match, but they just have to put gloves on. I mean, I think because they're both great grapplers, but I think Oliveira right now, he could be the master, possibly the greatest ever we've seen in the UFC, of that kind of anaconda style of jiu-jitsu where he just keeps coming and he works slow, and if you make one mistake, it gets tighter and it gets tighter and it never goes anywhere. I think he could be the master of that style. And the Dagestanis, they kind of do that, but just a more brutal version.
Yes.
Oliveira makes it look beautiful. It's all technique. It's all slick. But they do that with a more push-pull, brutal-looking style. And I would really like to see how that plays out against each other.
So Islam, I like him. I think the issue is kind of goes back to what we were talking about as to why people think or had Dustin over Oliveira as far as the favorite in that fight. I just don't think Islam has fought anybody yet that would allow him to jump Gaethje. And that was part of the argument. Everybody seems to hate DC now and questions his commentary and everything like that, which I think he's number 2, second to Joe Rogan. I think his commentary is great, but one of those fights started with, of course, Khabib and the whole Dagestani team are basically Team AKA, and those are his guys.
Right.
And he speaks up for his guys. Everybody's biased, period. If you're a wrestling head, you're going to go for the wrestler. You're a jiu-jitsu guy, you're going to go for the jiu-jitsu guy. If you are, a kickboxer, Muay Thai, you're going to go for the Muay Thai guy. So,
especially in a sport like fighting, it's very hard not to be biased.
Absolutely. And so him throwing that out there, him and Gaethje kind of had a hit but online, but I agree with Gaethje. I understand that Islam is on this streak, but comparatively speaking, he hasn't fought anywhere near the competition or beat that Gaethje has.
I feel like if Gaethje were to fight Oliveira, it's a bet. Like, that's going to end well for Oliveira. Like, I don't think Gaethje's going to have a good shot in that. With Poirier, I don't really know much. And as a casual fan, I feel what a casual fan would say is, I'm biased. I just want to see him fight Max Holloway again. That's
I don't think Max coming up again, though. And I definitely don't think he's going down. He's talking about going up. I would love to see for Oliveira, I definitely think he should fight Gaethje. I think that's an exciting fight. I don't know which direction it would go. Gaethje's a big boy. Oliveira's not a big 55 at all. He probably still can make 45 today,
Right.
right?
He's looked bigger in the last couple fights.
He did, but will you look at him next to Dustin, who's not a big 55? He didn't look big at all, and definitely he didn't look like he's ready to take shots from the big 55ers, right? But for Dustin, I would actually like to see one of the fights that you mentioned, Locke, and he mentioned. I would love to see him versus Nate Diaz at 170. It's a boxing match. We know that they are both going to go out there and box. Just don't go to the ground with Nate Diaz, and let's see an exciting fight with a lot of curse words and middle fingers.
Well, as a Nate fan, even though Poirier would be coming up and it'd be a smaller fighter at that class, he throws punches with dynamite in his hands, and I don't want to see that happen to Nate. Now, I know he has a strong chin. He'll be able to stand in there and fight. That's not a fight I'm wanting to see. If they do, I hope Nate is willing to take it to the ground.
I don't think Nate is ever willing to fight a fighter that doesn't have hands. Not the new Nate. Maybe back in the day when he was really trying to get a title and go for a run and he just wanted to who's next, right? But new Nate, I mean, he fought Masvidal, arguably the best boxer in MMA, right? And of course it didn't end well for him,
right.
But in his mind and with his boxing and everything like that, I think those are the fights that excite him.
So I think he literally said at one of his post-fight interviews when he was younger and coming up, like after choking out like the dentist and, a couple of those guys in a row, he said, I'm sick of fighting these so-called black belts or something, like so-called jiu-jitsu guys. And I think those are the fights he wants. I think for Poirier, the fight's probably Nate Diaz. And I think that's the fight the UFC will make because we know with one fight under contract, the UFC doesn't want to give Nate the Conor fight because they're scared to death that he beats Conor and then now his stock soars and he leaves and goes somewhere else. And Conor's now even lower. So they don't want to allow him. They'll let him do it if he resigns and stays there. So I don't think they're willing to do that. I do think they would be willing to let him fight Poirier, which is a fight they're probably more confident Poirier can win.
Right.
They'd rather send Nate on a loss, and they don't want to give him a good matchup if he's not going to re-up.
Yeah, plus they can make some money. And to your point as to, what you said, he mentioned, even if you look at the Conor fight, the first one, when he talks about that, it's like, all these guys basically say they're stand-up fighters, but as soon as they get hit, they become wrestlers, So it's like he'd rather stand up and bang, but, we know that his jiu-jitsu is probably the best part of his game, So, yeah, I would agree.
Well, the last thing I want to say about that, I think one thing that Dustin Poirier has to learn, because you had said earlier about if he goes ways and grapple, how people with Nate, they don't forget about him. With Conor, they don't forget about him because they go away for a while, then they come back. Yep. It's not important just to go away for a while. You also have to deny ever losing any fight ever the entire time.
There's always an excuse.
Yeah. So even if you lose, wait a year to come back and never acknowledge losing. You never lost. You're always the best.
You're the champ. You're the people's champ. Everybody else sucks.
Yes. Learn that, Dustin. Stop acknowledging your fucking losses. You've never lost. Never.
I agree. So before we wrap this up, I want to thank again Bugs from coming on. We haven't had a special guest in a while, so I want to thank him. And any last words from you, Bugs?
I appreciate you having me, man. It was fun to be here. It was nice to actually sit down and pick your guys' brains. I feel like when it comes to fighting, you guys are the most knowledgeable ones I know. I'm stuck out there with drunk 21-year-olds watching fights, yelling at the TV. So it is nice to sit down and just kind of talk about this. So appreciate you having me.
Every time at B-Dubs. Any last words from you, Locke?
No, it's a good topic. It was nice doing this in person. And the exact situation Bugs just described is why you exactly told me you stopped going to Buffalo Wild Wings to watch the fight.
Yes, this is true. Well, thank you all for listening. This wraps up another episode of the Fat Boy MMA podcast. Come back, listen again. That wraps up another Fat Boy MMA podcast. If you have a topic for us, please email us at fatboymma55@gmail.com or reach out to us on one of our social media platforms. You can find the links to all of our socials by going to links.fatboymma.com. Thank you for listening and look out for the next episode.